their plans for the year. Thanks, Cathy.
Dear SAFM, yes, I believe it is true that traditional leaders need and deserve the acknowledgement they should be getting and should have been getting a long, long time ago. But it is also true that the government's timing is very, very interesting and suspicious. They tell us immediately we should not be suspicious of government gifts, but we all know by now government gifts are ticking time bombs. Yeah, thank you SAFM for the debate and the conversations.
Morning, Cathy. Regarding the story of the box with Eskom, I really don't blame Eskom there. You know, there are people who are buying illegal electricity with 300 rands, and they get maybe for 5,000 units, 4,000 units, and stay for 6 months. You should, so that is a serious concern. If the person who's not working is got 400 units, you know, it's a serious concern. Where did he buy? Why can't he produce the receipt of the electricity that they bought? Because it's illegal electricity. Eskom is doing very well.
Hashtag SAFM Talking Point.
Ford is turning 100 and there's never been a better time to buy a brand new Ford. We're giving away 100 vouchers worth an amazing 50,000 Rand each and the sensational grand prize of us paying for one lucky winner's Ford. It's the celebration of the century. Visit a Ford dealer, buy a new Ford and win. T&Cs apply.
Manene namanenekazi.
Dove is not just gentle and moisturizing.
It took great care of the nation
During the Rugby World Cup France 2023. Dove rocks, just like the box.
Danko Unilever for your remarkable contribution to the momentous journey of global heroes.
Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
SAFM invites you to tune in for our inaugural public lecture, delivered by the former Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng.
This is an opportunity to use this privilege for the advancement of the cause of justice, because there is so much more that still needs to be done out there.
The theme for the lecture is Constitutionalism and Upholding the Rule of Law in South Africa, as corruption and malfeasance eroded the moral fabric of the democratic disposition. The lecture will take place on the 29th of November 2023, broadcasted live on SAFM 104 to 107 FM, streaming on Facebook, X and YouTube channels from 7 p.m. SAFM, leading the conversation.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
In our communities, we have the power to end gender-based violence. Let's focus on what we can do to stop it. Be informed and take action. Seek healthcare or report an incident. Call the Gender-Based Violence Command Center on 0800 4284 28. That's for support in your area. It takes a village to end gender-based violence, and we all play a role. What's your role? And this is a message that's been brought to you by Nakosa. In fact, this conversation brought to you by Nakosa. I'm sitting in a studio that is packed. Often I don't get to enjoy so many people around me in studio, so it's great to have all of you. Let me begin by introducing our guest for this hour. Dr. Ntlutleng Mabena is a technical specialist, community-based violence prevention and response. Dr. Mabena, good morning to you.
Good morning, Cathy.
Ndumiso Madubela is an adolescents and young people program specialist. Ndumiso, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy, and good morning to your listeners.
Tato Sinosha is a GBV prevention coordinator. Tato, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy.
And Haneri White is a capacity building specialist. Haneri, good morning to you.
Good morning, Cathy.
I think a good place to start really is perhaps broad reflections from you, Dr. Mabena, as we mark yet another 16 days of, activism against gender-based violence in this country. Yet, as the years go on, the campaigns increase, but so do the numbers increase. And one really has to ask, what is the disconnect? There is a disconnect, and that is reflected in the fact that the situation is not changing. From your perspective, why is it that we're still here today?
Thank you, Cathy. So I think we should be careful with saying campaigns, whether campaigns are working or not working. I really think that campaigns have a very important part to play in raising awareness, mobilizing people to take certain actions. Yes, it would look like we have been having these campaigns year after year and nothing is happening. But in fact, the fact that we are seeing increased numbers of people reporting is a sign that these campaigns have some kind of an impact. We're not saying that the incidences are happening more, but we're probably having more people feeling comfortable, knowing where to go to ask for help or even to go to report because of these campaigns. So we shouldn't feel disillusioned or feel like we are having these campaigns on a yearly basis. Are they actually yielding any fruit? They are yielding fruit. Maybe not the fruits that we want to see just yet, but at least now we've burst the abscess, if I can say that. People are coming forward. And once people are coming forward, then we can start addressing issues of how do we now decrease the behavior.
The fruit we want to see in Dumiso is that the levels of violence decrease. And I was making the point earlier that when one looks at the figures, there isn't immediately a distinction in terms of what is happening amongst different demographics. And by that, I mean, especially when we look at age groups, right? But very much, we don't have any reason to believe that younger people are less violent or experience less violence than perhaps the generations before them.
Yeah. You know what? I think, and we were just discussing this before we went on live now, and I think one thing I have to start with is absolutely every single person is a complicit. When we talk about gender-based violence, I think it's also going to be very important that we understand that it's very compounded, it's very layered, and super complex, and each and every single person is complicit. And the reason I'm saying that is because, again, it really, like the campaign says, that Nakosa's pushing now, is that it takes a village. And that is not just, if we're wanting to truly fight gender-based violence or want to resolve these issues or want to have these conversations, that cannot happen in silos. It has to be multi-sectorial. Every single person is involved, and again, it takes a village in terms of what is it that you are doing. So I don't think it's a generational thing to say that one group or a certain demographic, one group experiences more than other. We're just, unfortunately, the reality that we sit with is that we are a violent country. We have a legacy of violence in this country, and now I think the conversations and the direction that the conversation should be moving is that how do we find another alternative? How do we unpack these uncomfortable conversations? But more importantly, how do we call it out? How do we go to the centers for help, whether it's the Tutuzela care centers if I'm a gender-based violence victim or survivor? How do we have these uncomfortable conversations on a much more regular basis over and above the 16 days of activism as we are today?
Tato, you are a prevention coordinator, so you actually have to go into communities and have these conversations.
Yes.
Why are they so difficult to have? What is the challenge there? What are we experiencing that makes the conversation around gender-based violence as uncomfortable as it remains today?
So I don't believe that it's difficult. I think, like Ndumisa said, there's a lot of generational gaps that we need to also try and close the gap with. So with our communities, you'd find that even if we're going to speak to our youth, for example, the most people that we need to talk to are the parents. We need to reach out to the parents. That's where we're finding that some of these issues stem from the household first, and we're unable to reach these young people that we're trying to get the program running on. So I think, I think the one thing that we need to try and figure out or try and sensitize our communities on is that it starts with us first as parents. In order to get our young people to stop with violence, in order to get our young people to go into these programs and learn, we need to reach out to their parents first, because it doesn't help us getting our facilitators going into the community and recruiting and promoting these programs, but we can't even promote the same programs to the parents.
Henry, what do we do then? Because, in the midst of this intergenerational gap that Tato is speaking about, is also the reality that as long as violence is not addressed as it is, then the generational cycle of violence continues. So if we are unable to reach people where they are, then we've got no chance of actually breaking that cycle.
So true. And I think that is the big challenge, how to break that cycle. And some of the programs that our implementing partners run is to work with both young people to create a safe space for them to disclose even if they've experienced, because it is sometimes still such a, it sounds odd, but it's still stigmatized. People feel that it is so close, to create then a safe space for young people to disclose, and in that way of disclosing and opening it up and reporting it, like Tleng mentioned, in a way that also bring it to the open. But also, like Tato said, to parallel work with parents and to assist them, not to just talk to them, but to give them practical tools of how to communicate with young people, how to be aware of their emotional well-being, how to communicate and not just shout or hit, but to actually provide that space. And I think in that way, and then concurrently with that is then to talk about females and males, and to also bring male toxicity, I hope I pronounce the word male toxicity, to talk about those things as well. And in that way, I think we can break and don't. I grew up in a house that my mother was hit by my father. It's okay, I carry on, but to create spaces and to also provide peer support, where other survivors, young people, can talk to them.
What is the role of the boundaries that I think we create for ourselves as individuals?
Sure.
As Henry's speaking, and she's talking about also being able to speak about the shouting and the hitting of parents. And I know that often parents, the minute you start telling them how to raise their children, a wall goes up. And we don't even see that as part of violence, right? It's not violence, it's discipline. The violence that we recognize is that, okay, maybe when a man hits a woman or woman hits a man, then it's gender-based violence. But anything outside that very narrow prism cannot be seen as that. How do we begin then to say it's okay for us to have this discussion without making individuals also feel that they must be defensive or must become defensive about the tools that they have used all these years that they are known to work? If you don't hit your child, they'll never come right. So you have to hit them, because that's the only way to get them in line. And those are accepted, by the way. They're accepted ways of doing things, and they're re-entrenched in communities, but most importantly, just in this household structure. And so when you talk about it, you're touching people on their studios. And people don't want to be touched on their studios. Okay?
So I always say we need to remember always that I am a survivor and I am a perpetrator. If we approach each other like that as human beings, as both a survivor and a perpetrator, then we are getting somewhere in building relationships between ourselves. I think the issue here is about relationships. We are not used to talking with each other. We are talking at each other. As parents with children, as partners, as family members, we are talking at each other. So we need to start talking with each other, building that relationship. And the only way I can bring my vulnerability to the table to talk to Ndumiso and let Ndumiso come to the table to talk to me is if I come bare as a human being saying, I know I also do wrong, and yes, I've also been hurt too. That is where we start building the bridges of talking with each other, and so that we don't point fingers. We don't point fingers. It's not men's problems. It's not men who are causing this problem, but it's all of us.
Interesting. That is often where there is difficulty. If you look at some of the campaigns that have been run over the years, that have been equally effective, right? You have the Me Too movement, you have the hashtag Men Are Trash, you have various campaigns that I can think of just even in a South African context. The reason why they often receive backlash is because you will have people that say, no, but not all men are trash. Don't include me in it. So now when you say we have to all look at ourselves, that I, Cathy, am a perpetrator and I, Cathy, am a survivor. Ndumiso, you also said the same thing, just differently earlier. You said we are all, complicit in gender-based violence. So that means that I, Cathy, have to recognize that I'm complicit in gender-based violence. But I might think, but I've never hit anyone. I've never abused anyone. So why must I then be putting myself and taking responsibility for the actions of other people? Explain to us why that framework is so important in Tutle.
So I think historically we always know or think of violence as something that is very gruesome, that is blood, that is physical, that is sexual. But if we think about it, violence starts way before that. It starts psychologically, emotionally, how we speak to people. We are talking now about how we raise the children, how we shout at them, and how certain words bring certain emotions in the people. That already is violence. If all of us can say that we have never committed that kind of violence to anybody, if we can truly say, I've never done something like that, that's the only time you can say you are not a perpetrator. But whether you've never hit somebody with a fist or slapped somebody or raped somebody, if you've done something that's caused somebody emotional pain, we are perpetrators.
Sure. All right. On that note, I'm going to allow that to sink in, right? If you have caused anybody some kind of emotional pain, then you are complicit. You are a perpetrator when we talk about gender-based violence, when we think about this violence. That's really, really important in terms of framing then how we see ourselves in the context of everyday violence that takes place in our society. We'll continue the conversation in a moment. It's 10:30, time for the latest headlines.
Thank you, Cathy. In your headlines, President Cyril Ramaphosa has conveyed his condolences to the families of the 11 miners that died at the Impala Platinum operation in Rustenburg, Northwest on Monday. Presidential spokesperson Vincent Makwenya says the president has also wished the injured workers a speedy recovery. One of the instigators of the 2021 civil unrest, Mdumiseni Zuma, is expected to be sentenced in the Pietermaritzburg High Court today. In September, 36-year-old Zuma was found guilty of committing public violence and incitement to commit arson. And various organizations are today expected to participate in pro-Palestinian marches as part of the International Day of Solidarity with Palestine. The organizations are calling for a permanent ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas. I'll have details on these and other stories at 11. Cathy has your SAFM market update.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand is currently trading at 18 rand 68 to the dollar, 23 rand 56 to the pound, and 20 rand 44 to the euro. Markets in Asia ended mixed. The JSE mainly down in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are flat this hour. Gold is trading at $2,012. Platinum $923 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $80.25 a barrel.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
we continue the conversation on the talking point. We're looking at the hashtag It Takes a Village campaign, and it's really what are the things that we can be rethinking in our approach to gender-based violence, and what is the responsibility that we as members of communities can take in order to make sure that we play our own part in stopping the violence and in contributing to this better society that I believe we all want to create. So NACOSA, of course, is having this conversation in partnership with SAFM. I've got a number of guests in studio, Dr. Ntlotleng Mabena, Ndumiso Madubela, Tato Senosha, and Haneri White. So Ndumiso, let's talk about being able to talk with each other and not at each other, because this conversation, and I suppose it's because of the way that the numbers are also set up. It makes it difficult not to have it become a blame game, because yes, we have very high levels of violence in this country, in South Africa. Men kill men in this country on a day-to-day basis. But the reality we cannot run away from is that the violence that we also see is gendered. And so you have more women that are really victims at the hands of men. It is a statistical reality that we cannot move away from. But how do we have that conversation without then it seeming that it's finger pointing or blaming one over the other?
You know, Cathy, and that's such a crucial point on this very sensitive and what I imagine a very triggering topic of gender-based violence, especially in a nation that is in crisis. You know, if you look at I don't even think it's high. I think it's alarmingly high, right? But it's exactly that. I think one of the first things that we need to do is have these uncomfortable conversations. How do we create spaces where men can engage each other, where men can call each other out, where, and I think one of the things we're talking about is that often, we have these campaigns, 16 days of activism, and we're gonna have everyone tweet or everyone on their socials, and then the very next day you are part of the problem. How do we equip people with tools to engage in a healthy way where I can call you out? I can call you out and make you see what you're doing is hurting, and not because often what happens is that when I started with saying we are all complicit, is that how often do we experience or we see violence and we say, yep, it's indaba too, or it's a family business, I don't want to get involved. How often is it that a young girl gets raped and we call family meetings before we call police? How often is it that we see these and we say, I don't want to get involved? It's a thing of their relationship. That's the problem. How do we have conversations? And I always say, I'm not money. I don't expect to be liked by everyone. But how do I call you out? Because if you are in my immediate circle, and if you are on my WhatsApp group, if you are in my dinner table, and I'm unable to have uncomfortable truths with you, then we're lost as a nation, right?
But Ndumiso, people don't want to be told to mind their business, and it's not nice. Here nice. You are, you're wanting to help out, and you're told, but this is none of your business.
Yeah, well, I think I disagree. It is my business. The fact that I'm experiencing it, if it's happening in front of me, then it's immediately my business. The fact that it affects me, the fact that because if I dissolve myself from it and say it's not my business, then am I not complicit? Am I not part of the perpetrator? Am I not perpetuating it? And I think just as we're having these conversations, often we're thinking of the extreme violence, right? We're thinking of the like Dr. was saying, of the blood. No, it's so nuanced and it's not so small. There's I think about, for example, the rape culture pyramid. There's so many things that in an everyday becomes our everyday norm and language that we have as normal, that perpetuates environment for violence, for gender-based violence specifically. We as men, for example, not calling each other out. We as men talking or referring to other genders in a particular way, and that's seen as normal. Nah, that's a boys' talk. It's those type of conversations that we must correct. And that is not... So often, when you talk about this, you speak about the society or community almost as though that is not us. We speak about this as though it's an alien or a foreign concept. No, it's us. And similar with perpetrators, similar with rapists, similar with abusers, it's not people coming from a different planet. It's people we know. It's our uncles, it's our brothers, it's your siblings, it's your co-worker. It's similar with victims and survivors. It's people we know. So I really think we should divorce this idea of thinking it's it's none of my business, or it is my business. The fact that I'm experiencing it, the fact that I'm seeing it, the fact that I'm in the presence of it makes it my business.
Henry, I think this will be, an important time to talk about then the tools that are needed, especially in the process of calling people out. Because again, there is being able to call people out, but others will sit and look, no, but why are you being self-righteous? You don't come and get to tell me how to live my life. I don't tell you how to live your life. So what are the tools that we need in order to have these conversations in a way that's progressive? And when I say progressive, what I mean is that not really to be liked, but that at the end of the day, there must be a sense of the way in which I've had this conversation has had an impact and has been meaningful.
Sure. Not an easy question.
Yeah.
Because it will so much depend on the situation and on the individual as well. And I think there's also different levels. Like we're talking now in a friendship, in a real situation. But I think, and it may sound again so easy, it may sound theoretical, but I think it is to communicate with empathy. It is not to accuse immediately, because then you're going to alienate. And Notleng also talked about relationship. It is to work with that. But the tool is to communicate assertively by first acknowledging the situation and then still communicate directly, not accusingly, but directly, in terms of facts, in terms of even human rights abusing. And I think that for me is the answer. Empathy, to put yourself in that person's situation, and then also assertive communication.
But don't abusers thrive on empathy? Yeah. You've hurt me, and I can see you hurting other people. And instead of saying what you're doing is wrong, now I must still come and say, no, I understand, there's a situation that has happened. Let us talk about the matter. Yeah. And before you know it, you've had a conversation about something, but it has not been brought up at all what that thing is.
Yes, but I've also said then communicate assertively. You just want to latch onto that person. You don't want to immediately say, that what you are doing now, that accusing. One needs to have a strategy to actually, because we want to reach that person. We want to touch that person so that they really thought. So it's also to ask a question as well. So I think it is not easy to confront a person like that. But I think there are also other ways to bring people, to bring justice, even if one can call it that way. But that's sure. But it's certainly not to understand that abusers are also manipulators.
Tato, how would you say that you have been able to deal with that again, with the work that you're doing in different communities?
So, calling the behavior out, I think sometimes...
How do you call it out? Give me an example.
Sure. So like Hani was saying, using your assertiveness skills, for example. So in the event where... So, when you get into a community and you say, oh, I come from Nakosa and I'm going to be bringing a GBV prevention program, the first thing that they say is, but I'm not affected. That doesn't, I don't need it. There's no GBV happening at home, right? So then it's like, but is this happening? Is there some form of abuse happening at home? Or do you have, for example, a partner who is abusing your well-being or things like that? But the main problem is that when our young girls get into these relationships, their consent is very blurry. So we teach them that, you know what, if you're able to say to this man or this boy, you're doing something wrong, I don't like this, then they're able to come back and say, but, oh, okay, she just mentioned it, because they don't expect us to say that we're doing something wrong. We usually just say, oh, stop it, oh, don't do this. But if we call out their behavior, they're able to say, oh, yeah, she just literally called out my behavior, and it's something that we need to start doing with our parents as well. Yeah.
Ndlotlang, anything you want to add before we go to a break?
I wanted to bring back the theme of it takes a village and the multi-sectoral approach of building relationships, right? So, like you raised now, how do you talk to a perpetrator and say, oh, you did something wrong and whatever? I think the point is we need multiple conversations to be had at the same time by different people, by friends calling out, by families calling out, by colleagues. We need a layered conversation so that this person can really identify and see that, oh, actually there is a problem that I'm causing. So it's not a one conversation. It's not a survivor-perpetrator conversation that's once off, or a court and judge conversation that's once off. These are ongoing, multi-sectoral, multi-approach kind of conversations that we constantly need to be having to make people aware of their behavior, to make people aware that what they are doing is actually unacceptable.
I'll take your contributions to this conversation on 086 000 2032. That's the number to dial to reach our studio line, 086 000 2032. On the WhatsApp voice note line, 0614 104 107. What do you see as your role in fighting gender-based violence, especially in the context of the conversation we've been having? And what are often the challenges, the things that make it difficult to play that role? I'd also love to hear your perspectives on that. We'll take a quick break. I'm back with more after this.
Open the Absa Cash Invest Tracker account and earn the best rates in the market, more than the top 10 money market funds' average returns. Enjoy unmatched advantages at an interest rate of 8.9% per annum. Plus, if you open your account today, you could win your share of 15 million rand in luxury travel experiences for two. Yes, you heard right. A trip for you and your partner. My Bank does that. Open yours today in less than 5 minutes on the banking app, at your nearest Absa branch, or consult your private banker or call 0860 111 515. Absa is an authorized FSP and a registered credit provider. T's and C's apply.
Score big with Diadora South Africa, and your soccer team could soon face your opponents in Diadora gear. Show off your love for the game and gear up for victory. Join the competition now for a chance to win a full soccer team kit, a goalkeeper kit, and accessories. All you have to do is follow at Diadora.SouthAfrica on Instagram. Tag your team and teammates in the comment section of our posts. The competition closes on the 30th of November at 2 p.m. T's and C's apply.
# we love it here.
This great initiative is supported by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
Did you hear that? That's the sound of lights being switched off to reduce the impact of load shedding. Eskom is encouraging you to use less electricity at all times by switching off electrical appliances and lights that are not in use. Cell phone chargers, TVs, and decoders still use electricity if they're not switched off at the socket. You see, if we all switch off what is not in use, our combined effort could help reduce the impact of load shedding. Let's work together by switching off to reduce load shedding.
Score big with Diadora South Africa, and your soccer team could soon face your opponents in Diadora gear. Show off your love for the game and gear up for victory. Join the competition now for a chance to win a full soccer team kit, a goalkeeper kit, and accessories. All you have to do is follow at Diadora.South Africa on Instagram. Tag your team and teammates in the comment section of our posts. The competition closes on the 30th of November at 2 p.m. T's and C's apply.
Hashtag we love it here.
This great initiative is supported by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
Let's have the conversation. WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107.
Good morning, Cathy. You know, this gender-based violence and calling people out. It's easy to talk in the studio and hypothetically say you're part of the problem if you see it and things like that. But have you ever been in a restaurant or a bar or in the street and seen someone do something that you disagree with and tackled them and taken them on about it and see what their reaction would be? You probably end up in hospital, and if you don't have medical aid, you wish you never got involved.
It's a very legitimate point to raise. Does anybody want to respond to our listener there?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I agree, and I think we're not going to sit here and 100% agree with the listener. We're not going to sit here and romanticize that, this is something that has these solutions. And like I said earlier, gender-based violence is a very complex problem that needs complex and layered solutions. But in that situation, to give that example of I'm in a restaurant and I see something happening, what do you do? So for me, taking action is not necessarily getting involved in the fight and throwing the punches, but how are you de-escalating? How are you causing attention away from that? How are you calling for help? How are you calling police? How are you stopping that, as opposed to saying, that couple is in that altercation, let me move away and walk away. No, it's that. So the problem is we often say, hey, those guys are fighting, and we're quick to take videos and we move away. So for me, it's how do we address it? If that's my friend, for example, I divorce you. You are no longer, you are a reflection of who I am. I cannot have someone in my life that can act like that. If it's in a random restaurant, what am I doing to call help? What am I doing to make sure that is not normalized? Because I think a big problem is that so much of this, we're so desensitized to violence, just as a nation. We're so desensitized to this. And so often it's easier to say, I won't get involved. So for me, part of what are you doing is, it's practical actions and steps. If it's a violence, we're not promoting to say, get into bar fights or get into restaurant fights. And no. We're not going to resolve the problem like that.
All right. I want to go to Wellington. Charles, good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Cathy?
I'm all right, Charles. Go for it.
Fantastic, and I'm very happy to enter for the first time, really.
Well, welcome to the show, Charles. A pleasure to have you on air.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. You see, I just want to get involved a bit in your discussion. You know that there's that gentleman who said that South African men generally are actually very hard on the ladies. He's very right. The culture is actually the very bad thing which explains most of the gender-based violence that you find in the country. And besides that, you would find that this violence, it's like a syndicate. You find that most of the guys move in groups. They just get involved with the ladies. Now, those ladies, most of the time, it's not easy, especially when they no longer need those guys. They say they want to run away from them. They know easily, it's not easy for them to run away from them because even those guys, it's like they are always armed, you see. They carry guns and everything else. The only way that they can run away from them is maybe change from Joburg, they come to stay in the Western Cape. So it's that kind of a thing. Now, the analysts, most of the time when they're analyzing this, it's like they are reading a book. It's even better that at least sometimes they stay in Khayelitsha. You know, when they stay in Khayelitsha, they look at just how the violence is. Maybe they can even stop thinking about what they say is their really cause. Because most of the time it's something that you can't understand on the radio. Because when you are coming from a suburb and you're explaining gender-based violence, it's very different from the people that are in the location, like maybe they are here at Mbekweni or they are in Khayelitsha. It's not easy. So,
So Charles, do you believe that the way in which we have the conversation is divorced from the reality of what happens, in people's lives every day?
Actually, what I can say is that it's right. It's multifaceted, you see. This gender-based violence is actually can be explained in a lot of ways. But the best way to understand gender-based violence, obviously, that it normally happens between people that are close. Most of the time it's like that. People who are connected, you see, that we cannot run away from it. But the deadliest thing is to assume that this problem is simple. It's not simple. It's far from being very simple. It's actually very, very difficult. Because even the people that are supposed to report, they are scared that, I can't report him here, the one who's always fighting this lady. Maybe at the police, and you know what you know about the police, when you go there, they will actually tell Munaitis that, the one who reported that gentleman is this one. So you are in trouble, you see.
All right. All right, Charles. Thanks for that view. Charles out in Wellington. Loreen, you're calling us from Belito. Good morning.
Good morning. What a complex but important conversation we're having here. And I think my contribution is made up of two parts. The one is around females feeling disempowered economically in leaving these abusive relationships. And this is not just the lady that is a domestic worker or a woman living in Danfern who has been exposed to a particular lifestyle. Both women equally feeling that they will not be able to survive and thrive without the economical enablement of this man or what this man supplies in the household. So what we've seen is they begin to stay in the relationship because of not believing that they're able to thrive outside economically, So there's a bit of work that needs to happen there. And I think on the male side, what I've seen is men don't talk. And men do not create safe spaces for themselves to have vulnerable conversations about what really is the issue. So I can't, as a woman, say, let's talk. Sometimes you need a man-to-man conversation in a safe environment, a safe mental space to go, I have struggled with abandonment issues from my mother or from my dad. And that then, stems out to then abuse or whatever that might look like. And so I've seen Dav Men conversation with Andile. I can't remember his surname, but he's a psychologist, always wears Maxhosa gear. And also I think he's a traditional healer of some sort, but he is a psychologist by profession. And he's created conversations with men around, let's unpack this thing. Where is the deep root of the issue? And I think around the braai, instead of talking about soccer and rugby games, how do we create and facilitate these safe spaces around braais where men can have these vulnerable conversations?
All right.
And I think you need to start there. There's one on the female side, and there's a huge job to be done on the men's side.
All right.
Yeah, that's
Thanks,
my contribution today.
Thanks,
and thank you again.
Sure. Thanks for that contribution, Lauren. I think, really thought out in terms of where some of the interventions can come in. Jeffrey in Durban. Good morning, Jeffrey.
Morning, Cathy. Yeah, I just want to talk about, I was from Cape Town going to Kimberley side. So at Victoria Way, I met a guy who was checking the lady and
Jeffrey, unfortunately, the line to you isn't great. I don't know if you're able to maybe move around a bit.
Oh, no, I'm driving. Yeah,
okay, all right.
I'm from
Jeffrey, I'm so sorry. We're going to have to leave it there. That connection to you is not great at all. Unfortunately, I won't be able to continue taking you so that we get your contribution. But I think some important things have been said from the listeners and their contribution to the conversation. I'm going to start on this end of the room. And Henry, begin perhaps with your responses to what has been said. And then we'll end it up here, also mindful of the fact that, we're in a race against the clock. Somehow the time has just flown by. Henry?
I just want to respond to the second person who phoned in who also acknowledged the fact that it's not easy for women to leave. And I think that there are so many reasons. And sometimes we give up on women and we say, all these, there is the protection order, all these things are in place, there is legislation, why don't you leave him? And then we give up on them. And I think it is also to understand that it's not so easy to leave, and that we should role players, stakeholders, service providers like social workers, like health workers, understand that and carry on to support that woman and to strengthen them. And it's their own time, and not to give up.
All right. Thanks for that. Tato?
So what I took from that, I think it was Lorraine, where she was speaking about women and the economical factors surrounding GBV, for example. So interventions surrounding that are there. So we have protective asset building, for example, where we teach our young girls to learn how to save, financial literacy skills, where they'll be able to, whatever money that they're getting, whether it's your SASA, whether it's your grant, they're able to use that money to do whatever that they need, so that they don't have to go outside of their own pocket to get anything for their children, anything for themselves. Because what we tend to normalize is that our young girls need to go find a boyfriend or a sugar daddy to give them money to do things for their kids and so forth. So I think these interventions, such as financial literacy, are able to keep our girls at home, and they're able to keep our girls in a safe environment where they're able to look after themselves, where they're able to provide for themselves and their children, and basically try and minimize the relationships between an older partner and them.
Yeah. And I think these are the things about ourselves that sometimes we're not willing to acknowledge,
Yes,
right?
definitely.
That we normalize, because these young girls go in pursuit of these relationships, sometimes because of the pressure that they're getting at home. They're being pushed in that direction.
Child-headed households.
Yes, in many instances. Ndumiso?
Yes, 100%. So I think, importantly, as the campaign says, it takes a village. It's a collective effort. We know that there are systematic issues involved. There are multiple stakeholders that are needed, because the same person who's going to go and report to the police, and the first thing they're going to ask you is, were you disrespectful? Or what did you do to trigger him? So if we are really serious as a nation to end gender-based violence, it's important that we call it out when we see it. We are honest with ourselves. We introspect 100%, and we have these uncomfortable conversations, whether it's prize, whether it's dinner tables, in absolutely each and every single setting. And I think, as the campaign says, that it takes a village that Nakosa is running, is that everyone has to show up. Absolutely, everyone has to show up.
Ntloteng, tell us a bit about the programs that you run and how people can get involved in a minute, please.
Okay, so as Nakosa, we do a lot of GBV prevention work, where we work a lot with communities, with adolescent girls and young women, even adolescent boys and young men, to try and build, as Tato has said, their protective assets, cognitive assets, so information about what is socially acceptable and what should be socially challenging, and also creating safe spaces and communities for young people to come, hang out, have different types of conversations for the first time, and not talk about toxic things. What's my boyfriend gonna buy me? What car does my boyfriend drive? Change the types of conversations that young people are having, so that they can be able to call people out. But we also support GBV response programs, where we work a lot with the Department of Health, where if anybody has experienced violence, are able to access healthcare services to mitigate the health consequences of violence. So we make sure that people have access to HIV, STI treatment, preventing unwanted pregnancies, but also get the psychological support and counseling that they need. So we work a lot at the different health facilities to make sure that the services are accessible.
All right. Let me thank you all for coming into studio and being part of this conversation. In our communities, we have the power, as you've heard, to end gender-based violence. Let's focus on what we can do to stop it. Be informed and take action. Seek healthcare or report an incident, call the Gender-Based Violence Command Center on 0800 428428 for support in your area. It takes a village to end gender-based violence, and we all play a role. What's your role? And this is the message brought to you by Nakosa. It's just after 11. Time for your latest news.
Independent and impartial. This is SAFM News.
Thank you, Cathy. In your top stories, a man given hefty sentence for inciting the 2021 July riot, and the president sends condolences for victims of a mine disaster. This is SAFM News. A very good morning. I am Luyanda Maume. We'll start with news just in. One of the instigators of the 2021 civil unrest has been sentenced to 12 years in jail. Mdumiseni Zuma appeared in the High Court in Pietermaritzburg this morning. In September, 36-year-old Zuma was found guilty of committing public violence and incitement to commit arson. The charges stemmed from the looting and destruction of the Pietermaritzburg's Brookside shopping mall during the unrest. Zuma was a security guard at the mall at the time of the incident. He recorded the video encouraging people to loot the establishment but claimed it was a prank, adding that he was drunk at the time. President Cyril Ramaphosa has expressed sadness at the death of 11 mine workers at the Impala Platinum mine in Rustenburg in the northwest. 75 mine workers were injured, 10 of them seriously, in an incident which happened on Monday. The president has offered his condolences to the family of the deceased mine workers. Kenny Mapanga reports.
President Ramaphosa has also wished injured miners a full recovery and further called on all stakeholders to assist the Chief Inspector of Mines in the investigation that will be undertaken in terms of the Mine Health and Safety Act. Ramaphosa says that this process is vital to protecting mine workers in line with the industry's zero harm objectives and enabling operational continuity in mines. Kenny Mapanga, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Meanwhile, some families of the deceased mine workers have arrived at a private funeral parlor in Majaganing near Brits, where postmortems will be conducted. The National Union of Mine Workers, NUM, says the country's energy crisis is causing job losses in the mining sector. This comes after the NUM announced that 10,000 mine workers could be retrenched by January next year. The union says gold and platinum mining companies have issued retrenchment notices in recent months. NUM spokesperson Lufed Chilwane says they are calling on mining companies to be considerate.
They should actually look at alternatives to try to, if possible, re-empower those workers so that they can transfer them to other operations that are not affected by what they are stating. So I can confidently say to you that the National Union of Mine Workers is currently engaging with those companies to try to see if an alternative can come out.
Various organizations are today expected to participate in pro-Palestinian marches as part of the International Day of Solidarity with Palestine. The organizations are calling for a permanent ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas. Last week, Parliament voted in favor of a motion to close the Israeli embassy in Pretoria and to suspend all diplomatic ties with Israel. Africa for Palestine Director Mohamed Desai.
Well, the United Nations passed a resolution to mark this day as a day in which the world should contribute towards raising awareness of the plight of the Palestinian people. It's very similar, in fact, to the United Nations resolution that was once in place to raise awareness about the plight of South Africa during the days of apartheid. And so it's a day in which people across the world, both in the government sector but also within the civil society, mobilizes and organizes and arranges different forms of action in order to put the spotlight onto the Palestinian plight.
And finally, British singer Elton John is heading to Parliament to urge ministers to do more to hit a 2030 target of eliminating new HIV cases in England. The star will address MPs at a meeting tonight. It comes as a pioneering new testing scheme identifies more than 580 previously undiagnosed cases. Under the scheme, anyone having a blood test in selected hospital A&E units is also tested for HIV, hepatitis B and hepatitis C unless they opted out. Recapping your top story, one of the instigators of the 2021 civil unrest has been sentenced to 12 years in jail. Mdumiseni Zuma appeared in the High Court in Pietermaritzburg this morning. Your headlines at 11:30 with Dineo Motaung for SAFM News. My name is Luyanda Maume and I'm out.
Here, there, and everywhere. SAFM 106.1 FM in Bombela. If you're active on social media and love SAFM, we hope you'll take a moment to like or follow our SAFM page on Facebook and Twitter. These are the best places to find all the guest information, conversations, and stories you love from your favorite presenters, along with regular updates from SABC News. And don't forget, you can send your questions to feedback@safm.co.za. SAFM, leading the conversation. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
It's 7 after 11 o'clock. Welcome to the third and final hour of the show. And today for our health and wellness feature, we're looking at the breakthrough that has been made, particularly when it comes to effective treatment to prevent multi-drug resistant TB in both children and adults. Professor Annika Hesseling is the director of the Desmond Tutu TB Center and the overall principal investigator of the TB Champ trial at Stellenbosch University. Professor Hesseling, good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be on your show today.
Firstly, let's just begin with this clinical research that you have been, part of, and this, the kind of breakthrough that it is really presenting when it comes to the treatment of multi-drug resistant TB.
Yes, thank you. We are quite excited and have just been able to share these results with the rest of the world in the last week at the big TB conference in Paris. And essentially, we had undertaken a large trial in South Africa, a proudly South African study, I must say, to look at ways to prevent TB in kids who've been exposed to someone in the household with multi-drug resistant TB. That is essentially TB that's resistant to our two first-line most important TB drugs, rifampicin and INH. We specifically did this study in young children in South Africa because young children, once they've been exposed to TB, have a high risk of getting TB disease, and also they have a high risk of developing severe forms of disease. So prevention is really, really important. We also really knew that from other research before, and it's really well established, that we can give someone one or two antibiotics if they've been exposed to drug-susceptible TB, and that prevents TB in someone with the normal strains of TB. But never had a trial ever been done in the world to look at generating high-quality evidence to look at ways to prevent drug-resistant TB in those who've been exposed, and specifically in the household. So this was the first ever trial to do this in the world. And interestingly, we focused on kids because we are so aware and concerned about the burden of tuberculosis in children in South Africa and in Africa in general. In parallel to us, however, a large trial group did an adult-focused study in Vietnam. That was called the VCUN trial, and it really looked at adults and adolescents in Vietnam. And these two trials, then eventually, in parallel, we had come up with the same question, the same study design, the same methods, and we became aware of these two trials and then started working together to be able to, at the end of the day, compare results across Vietnam and South Africa, and also importantly, to be able to have results that are relevant for people from age 0 to age 99, so that findings would not only be relevant to adults or to kids or to adolescents. And so at the big TB meeting, the International Union Against Lung Diseases, Tuberculosis and Lung Diseases in Paris a week ago, we presented the findings from the kiddie study called TB Champ. And then in parallel, the adult team from VCUN, and that trial was led by Professor Greg Fox at University of Sydney in Australia, presented the data from the adult trial. And it was really seamless because it was adults and kids. And then we presented the joint results from combining the results from these two trials. So that was really a nice way to show also that global collaboration can make a joint impact efficiently, and collaboration is really the way to go.
Before we get into the details of what you have been able to find and the role really that this treatment plays, I want you just to focus on the vulnerability of children to multi-drug resistant TB, and in particular, the challenges that are faced when it comes to treatment. Because we know, with adults, it's sort of, it develops often. You're the expert here, so you'll correct me where I'm wrong, Prof. But often, the disease develops into being multi-drug resistant. Whereas if a child then is infected with this disease, but at the point at which it is already multi-drug resistant, what kind of challenges does that pose?
Well, that's an absolutely fantastic question. And yeah, you have great insight. So I think that it's for us important to realize that, yes, drug-resistant TB tuberculosis can develop in adults. And so people who are not given the appropriate treatment or who can't take all of their treatment, so it can develop in adults. But actually half of all the MDR TB in South Africa in adults is from people who just got infected with a strain that was already resistant. So this is what we call transmitted drug-resistant TB. So developed in someone at some stage, but that strain can directly be transferred from myself to yourself if I cough enough around you and am I close enough contact to you. So in general, children are infected with a strain from an adult that's been coughed up, which they inhale. And so generally, children actually, as you rightly point out, they are just infected with the strain of TB from the beginning. And in general, they don't actually develop drug-resistant TB. But it's important to note that about half of people in South Africa who currently get MDR TB or multi-drug resistant TB have also been infected in the same way. They're just unlucky enough to inhale that strain that's already resistant. So it's not just people developing resistance because they haven't been taking their treatments. It's really much more complex than that. But so, yes, so children, the good news is actually that kids who have TB in general and also kids with MDR TB do really, really well on treatment. The big challenge is really to find them early enough to diagnose them proactively and to get them onto treatment. Kids with MDR TB have better treatment outcomes than adults if they're treated appropriately. And that's actually in general because they have fewer bugs on board. So they have a lower organism load. So it's actually easier to kill off those bugs with a combination of treatments. You can actually probably treat them for much shorter than adults, but we don't know that yet. So in general, kids with MDR TB now do extremely well on treatment. And the field of treatment for MDR TB globally has been rapidly changing. And that's evidenced by multiple new guidelines on how to treat MDR TB in adults that are rapidly emerging as new data comes out. And for example, to be practical, as recent as 6 years ago in South Africa, we would treat people with MDR TB with long regimens, 18 months, give them antibiotics that were injectable, so really painful into their muscle every day, had a lot of side effects. More than 25% of people would become deaf, and were really traumatic. Now we are looking at South Africa and globally being able to treat people with MDR TB, not everyone, but many, with 6 months of all oral treatment, which is really actually what we've been used to being giving to people with drug-susceptible TB. So the treatment has become far better, far more effective. And a lot of this is because of research done in South Africa by South African TB researchers across the country, showing that if people can access these new drugs and regimens, they have really good outcome, they do extremely well, and they can be managed really well. So in kids, they haven't always yet been, I think, experiencing the full advantage of these new therapeutic data and evidence, because often children have been excluded from these trials, and also pregnant and postpartum women. So the people, like kids who actually respond the best to treatment, have often been the least or likely to be included in this research. But thankfully, for the really important drugs like bedaquiline, we have been doing research in South Africa, which has really influenced the World Health Organization and our South African TB program to recommend the use of these newer drugs in kids. and specifically a drug like bedaquiline, new drugs like delaminid, and we can now very effectively treat kids with MDR-TB, the average kid that we present for something like 6 to 9 months. So our South African TB program is very progressive, and often the evidence has been generated from South Africa for adults and for kids, and also for pregnant women. So one important aspect is to note that our new 6-month oral standard regimen for adults and adolescents, it's only recommended for adults and adolescents age 15 and older because the research, the clinical trials only included those groups. They excluded kids, they excluded pregnant women. So we don't yet have that standard new 6-month regimen to use in kids, which would be the B-PALM or the B-PAL regimen. So there have been great advances, in summary, to better treat MDR-TB, but it's still quite expensive to treat. It's still complex to actually look at monitoring the safety of these people who receive these treatments. And some of the medications we use, like the linezolid, which is very, very effective, have a lot of side effects, and we need to monitor people very carefully still.
Yeah.
So the reason actually why it's so important to have looked at prevention is that prevention is always better than cure. And that's true for TB in general, but specifically for MDR-TB, because it still is a complex and expensive and relatively toxic regimen to use in kids. And we really would like to prevent that rather than to have them develop TB disease and complications and be treated in this way. And that's exactly why we set out to do this TB CHAMP trial in South Africa.
Professor Hesseling, I'm recalling now, probably around 2010 and maybe a few years before then, when the treatment of multi-drug resistant patients was a conversation that had become mainstream, particularly in the media at the time. We would have visuals of these areas and hospitals that were designated for the treatment of patients, and one really got a sense that a lot went into managing the disease. In some instances, there would be patients that would escape the treatment centers, and a big fuss would be made about trying to track these patients down and bring them back into hospital so that they can finish their treatment. Do you think that the same kind of attention is still being given to how multi-drug resistant TB is managed? And part of the reason why I ask this is because you've said half of infections actually come from people who have just inhaled a strain of multi-drug resistant TB, which means that we have people that are still undergoing treatment for this disease that are just out in society.
Yeah, I think that's true for TB in general, that we're not finding everyone. But I can also say we're not finding all the people with TB. And a prevalence survey that was done in South Africa a couple of years ago showed that there were many people who had TB, who were lab positive, who didn't even have symptoms and didn't seek healthcare. But I think for MDR-TB, we should be careful to not just focus on MDR-TB exceptionalism. Drug-resistant TB is really an indication of how well our program has been working and how well we're actually using the drugs and the regimens, which we need to protect really carefully. We've had a big move towards implementing nationally, and we were one of the first adopters, very rapid diagnostics. So we can really diagnose someone with TB and even see if they're drug-resistant TB within a couple of hours in sputum. And we were also the first country in the world, already in 2017, 2018, to recommend not using injectables in people with MDR-TB and to use bedaquiline, which is the backbone of the new regimens. And we've been pioneering in that regard. So I think that we are more rapidly detecting TB, all kinds of TB, and also drug-resistant TB, and we are also treating it more effectively. And people, once they actually access TB treatment and they get started on TB treatment, can become less infectious really rapidly. So that's true for all forms of TB. And our actual prevalence of MDR-TB in South Africa has not increased if we look at our latest data. So I think in general, we need to look at TB control more globally, more holistically, and look at where is the transmission happening? Can we find people earlier, but not just find and diagnose them, but also link them to care and make sure they get the right appropriate treatment and the more holistic support. You asked me earlier on about, or you mentioned the determinants. So tuberculosis remains a disease of poverty. The social determinants of TB risk are huge. yes, it's important to find people, give them a diagnosis, get them the appropriate treatment, but they also need support to be able to take their treatment. They need to have food to eat to take their medications, otherwise they're not going to want to take them. And it's not easy to take medicines on a daily basis. It's getting much easier now for MDR-TB. I mentioned a 6-month regimen. And also because of the amazing advances that have been made in South Africa, there's also been a big move. You mentioned earlier about the images of people in hospital and trying to find them. In general, we have, in South Africa for TB control program, we have a decentralized model of care. That means we can treat people in the local community, at the local TB clinic, at the local health facility, appropriately and well. Even MDR-TB, again, if people start taking the medicines, they'll be not infectious really, really quickly, and they need support to be able to take that. So our decentralized model of care in South Africa is a really good model, and it also means people can stay in their community safely. Families are not split up. We try not to admit anyone to hospital with TB unless they really cannot take their treatment, unless they're extremely unwell, they've had a complication, or unless the social circumstances are such that they cannot be supported at home. And even children with the most severe forms of TB in the Western Cape, like TB meningitis, at Tygerberg Hospital, more than half of these kids actually get a home-based treatment program so that kids are with their families, they're not separated from their families, they're not stuck in a hospital, which is far better for the child, far better for the family, and also, easier for healthcare services. So I think South Africa has changed. It's been very progressive in our TB control program. Everyone with TB, including people with MDR-TB, can get a rapid diagnosis, can get appropriate treatment, and they can really be treated locally. The sooner we find people with TB and put them on the appropriate treatment, the less severe their disease will be, the fewer complications they'll have, the easier it is to actually cure them promptly. And that is also the case for children. So, working in the Western Cape and working with our government partners here, including Western Cape Department of Health and Cape Town Metro Health Services, it's really, really been quite encouraging to see this progress. I think it's also important to look at the rest of the country and healthcare services and investment in healthcare services to ensure that health services are there to support patients optimally. There is a huge amount of expertise nationally across all of our provinces in MDR-TB treatment management, and there are really some, I would say, champions globally and nationally for better access to MDR treatment for everyone, adults, children, adolescents, and pregnant women. So I think we're quite progressive in this regard, but I think we need to be careful to not see MDR-TB as something special. It's all on the continuum of TB. And preventing the development of resistance is really important. And this we can do by finding people promptly and ensuring they get the best possible regimen to which that bug is actually going to react to and respond to, and ensuring that we don't breed more resistance going forward. There are very, very exciting new developments in terms of a pipeline of new TB medications being developed. And the idea is to actually look at developing and testing and then ultimately using regimens that are protecting the drugs. So, for example, if you have a regimen of 4 drugs and they all work together to tackle the bug from different angles, and you're on that regimen and the medications protect each other, then you're not going to be developing resistance that much going forward. The reason why we're seeing emergence of some bedaquiline resistance, so that's our backbone key drug for the new regimens, is that people haven't always received the most optimal regimens. That will now change with more standard regimens being recommended for everyone. And also the drug bedaquiline, which is an amazing drug, has a very, very, very long half-life. So basically that drug sticks around in your body. So for example, if you take your medicines and you stop the 3 or 4 other medicines you're taking, that bedaquiline medicine still sits on board and it stays in your body for many months. So it's really important that we protect these new medicines by giving them in combination with others. You do not want to be giving someone a single drug effectively for a bug that requires more than one drug to be able to contain it and kill it off.
What is making it so difficult when it comes to TB screening and diagnosis?
Yeah, I think, I'll focus on kids specifically, and kids, young children, and so the biggest burden of tuberculosis globally and also in South Africa is actually in children below the age of 5. So that would be 60% of the pediatric disease burden. And WHO sees a child as 0 to 14, which is a bit arbitrary, but anyway, that's how the definitions we use. But kids below the age of 5, so 0 to 4-year-olds, make up the biggest burden. And you can imagine that a young child, if they have a cough or a fever or not eating so well, it can be a host of other things. So the symptoms are often very non-specific. There could be a host of other childhood illnesses. And if a young child is sick, the mom or the caregiver would take that child or the baby to the local healthcare center. And someone actually has to think that it potentially could be TB and test them for TB or referring to the TB clinic for testing. And so we find that children often present many times to TB or to healthcare centers before someone thinks of TB. So it's not actually that difficult in kids. One just needs to think about it. And the symptoms can be a bit non-specific. So a cough, that can be many other things. Fever, night sweats, loss of weight, poor eating, not playing so well. So one needs to think of TB, especially in a setting like South Africa with very high burden. And then also for testing and making the diagnosis of TB in kids, there's not one magic bullet. We do this test and it's going to be positive and you have TB. We really have to look at, as a colleague of mine, Liz Walter said, it's the diagnostic puzzle, and you need to use all the pieces of your puzzle to come up with a good diagnosis. And actually looking at the history, the symptoms that I've just mentioned, whether there's been exposure to someone with tuberculosis, a close contact, looking at the child's x-ray, looking at them clinically, and then the samples we take to see if we can get the TB bug. These all together help us make a diagnosis. And a diagnosis can actually be made clinically with very little fancy tools, using very nice pragmatic algorithms to actually screen and diagnose kids. And these are recommended globally, and they will also be in our new national TB guidelines for children.
All right.
So one can actually make a diagnosis quite effectively if you rely on the tools that you have. And in many young children, they have a history of the TB contact, and that is something that is an extremely useful thing if it's present.
Professor Anneke Hesseling is the director of the Desmond Tutu TB Centre. I'll be taking your calls on the other side of the 11:30 news headlines. You can dial in on 086 000 2032 on the WhatsApp voice note line 0614 104 107. Do you have specific questions around the treatment of multi-drug resistant TB, particularly in children? While she's standing by, we'll be taking any of the questions you may have for her. We'll do that after this break.
SV Darmstadt and FC Köln are both faced with the same dilemma. They are navigating a path to relocate from the uncomfortable zone. The Lilies want to impress home fans, but the Billy Goats believe they can shine away from home. This is the Bundesliga. Football as it's meant to be. Catch the glittering clash between SV Darmstadt and FC Köln this Friday, 1 December at 9:30 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
Here, there, and everywhere. SAFM 106.6 FM in Bloemfontein.
With the headlines at 11:30, I am Dinamo Taung. Good morning. One of the instigators of the 2021 civil unrest has been sentenced to 12 years imprisonment in the Pietermaritzburg Regional Court in KwaZulu-Natal. In other news, President Cyril Ramaphosa has expressed sadness at the death of 11 mine workers at the Impala Platinum Mine in Rustenburg in the northwest. And Israel says it has received another list of potential hostages who may be released by Hamas today. A full update follows at the top of the hour.
Across South Africa, online and on radio. SAFM, let's talk. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point. Professor Anneke Hesseling is the director of the Desmond Tutu TB Centre and overall principal investigator of the TB Champ trial at Stellenbosch University. And really, it's a breakthrough that has been made when it comes to treating multi-drug resistant TB, particularly in children. So, Prof. Hesseling, I want us to talk about the success rate of this treatment that you were able to see in the trial? And are we at a point where we can say that with effective treatment, MDR TB in children can be cured?
Thank you very much. Yes, so this trial, TB Chub, specifically focused on the prevention. So kids have been exposed to MDR TB, preventing them from going on to develop disease. So this is a preventive treatment trial, preventive therapy trial, and kids were essentially well, and they were randomized to receive a standard antibiotic we use for MDR TB treatment, levofloxacin, versus placebo, because there'd been no clear evidence to date. And then we followed children to see whether they would develop TB or not. We found actually that levofloxacin was almost 60%, so 56, so almost 60% effective in preventing kids developing MDR TB if they were exposed to an adult with sputum-positive adults MDR TB in the household. And very importantly, not only was it very effective, it was extremely safe. Kids could actually take this medicine, they accepted it, they could take it on a daily basis, they tolerated it, and it was acceptable. So we looked at whether it protected, so its efficacy, and then we looked at the safety. Extremely, extremely safe. No serious concerns at all about using this medication. And it's really important when we look at prevention that something is primarily safe, and not only that it protects against disease. So levofloxacin actually worked extremely well to prevent kids with MDR TB exposure from developing MDR TB. In the parallel trial done in Vietnam by the Quinn team, they found very similar results in adults. So by combining the data from the adults and the kiddie study, the Vietnamese study and the South African study, we showed that together, looking at across the two studies, in general, 60% of people were protected from developing MDR TB who were in household contact with someone with infectious MDR TB. So it's really, really effective across all ages. It was particularly safe in children, and we enrolled children primarily 0 to 4 years of age in South Africa across 6 provinces with amazing collaboration from investigators and communities and households all over South Africa. And so we can say we can safely and effectively prevent MDR TB in children by giving them levofloxacin once a day for 6 months. But you also have asked about the treatment of disease. Yes, we know we can also treat children with MDR TB disease very effectively by using these newer regimens and medications, and specifically using a drug like bedaquiline. We can now treat children with MDR TB for 6 to 9 months routinely with a cure rate of more than 90%. So that is phenomenal. That's actually better than any adults do, and children in general do extremely well if they're treated for TB, also for MDR TB. And the reason for this is that they just have fewer organisms on board. So there are not so many bugs that needed to be killed by these concoction of antibiotics we give. And so we can give 4 to 5 medications to children and effectively treat the MDR TB within 6 or 9 months. A couple of years ago, that was still 18 months, with much more toxic, much more complicated, and much more burdensome treatments. So there really has been a massive advance in the field. And kids kind of are the best example of the people who do the best on treatment. If you find them, you diagnose them and you treat them, which is really, really very gratifying.
When it comes to then the findings of this research, knowing what we do now, how are you anticipating that the work that you have done alongside your colleagues will impact how we roll out prevention programs or prevention regimes, even in South Africa?
Yeah, that's obviously the most important question, right? Yes, so we have shared the information, as I said, at this big international TB meeting in the last week. But then more importantly, or as importantly, in parallel, we've also shared this information with our national TB program so that they're aware first before data goes out that this is the results. And they've been informed of the trial's kind of progress to date. And we have been sharing these information with the World Health Organization. And in fact, the guideline meeting to look at this evidence from these 2 trials is ongoing. Next week, during the week of the 4th of December, the final guideline meeting will convene, the World Health Organization guideline meeting, where this evidence is presented to a panel of experts. And then they will make recommendations or not based on what they think of the evidence. So our job is to provide the evidence and in a way that it's accessible and clear. And the evidence we provide is on things like, does it work? Is it efficacious? Is it safe? Do kids like it? Can they tolerate it? Does it have other unintended consequences? Does it breed more resistance? And it seems no. And then what is the cost? And is it cost effective? So all of these data are then shared with WHO. And then with WHO and our national TB program, or following WHO guidelines, we'll be deliberating with the national TB program and its directors and directorate to look at whether this information should be incorporated into the national TB guidelines in South Africa. Early in the year, the South African TB program released updated guidelines on recommending preventive therapy for anyone, not just a young child who's been in contact with TB in the household. And so this is MDR TB, so that's really not that different. So it might be that there may in future be updated guidelines on better prevention of MDR TB treatment in South Africa once WHO and the National TB Program has reviewed the evidence. So that is our job, to provide that evidence clearly. And I had mentioned the cost. You want something to be effective and safe, but you also want it to be cost effective, but more importantly, affordable, right? So the health economics work, which has been led by Tommy Wilkinson, who is registered for his PhD at the University of Cape Town, has shown that for the 6 months of daily levofloxacin, the regimen to prevent MDR TB in kids, it was not only highly cost effective, it actually saved costs. For every 1,000 children given this regimen, more than $11 million was saved. And more importantly, children did not develop MDR TB, so number of cases prevented, number of deaths prevented, a number of children who developed severe forms of MDR TB. So for a prevention strategy in general, something that's cost saving is really extremely appealing from a health services perspective. So all of this data has then been shared with the World Health Organization. And in fact, on Monday, the last data preparation meeting was held. And next Monday, the guideline meeting starts. And then we all join that from all over the world. And then we provide the evidence along with the other trial team from Vietnam. And the expert panel then reviews the evidence. And then we'll see whether WHO indeed needs to make a clear, strong recommendation based on good quality evidence or not.
Sure.
So that is a little bit out of our hands. So we hope for the best.
Outside of just the obvious insights that you would have gained on such a collaborative project, working with people from different parts of the world, what else would you say you have been able to take out of this experience, especially because it gives you the opportunity of, in a way, benchmarking us against what is happening elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, I think it's really encouraging, actually, just having been to this big TB meeting in Paris recently, to see the quality and the quantity of tuberculosis research coming out of South Africa. At every single meeting, that was evident. So I think we really are a global leader in tuberculosis research. We have a big burden of disease, yes, but we also have people that are incredibly dedicated and committed to making a difference. And I'm really proud of that fact. And tuberculosis remains the #1 killer of South Africans. So I do think that it's important that we don't lose sight of that. And we also don't lose sight of the fact that it remains a disease of poverty. So the research that we do, yes, is really groundbreaking in terms of bringing new tools like prevention and treatment. But we should also continue as researchers and as a society looking at the broader context of tuberculosis and looking at the vulnerabilities to tuberculosis. One of the key lessons I've learned by leading this trial, which was really, really hard to implement and get funded and finish. And also we had to finish this trial during COVID, and there was a moratorium placed on doing non-COVID clinical research in South Africa. We had to pause the study. I was just completely blown away by people's willingness to participate in research, to have their children on research. And I was also really struck by the fact that MDR TB exposure for this kid in these households is probably the least of their worries. These are really families in crisis, extremely marginalized, extremely vulnerable, had often had TB, multiple episodes in the family over the preceding years, had lost income. And we will be actually, looking at the evidence and really characterizing how vulnerable these households really are socioeconomically and socially, and compared to the average South African family. So MDR TB, yes, people are worried about the kids getting MDR TB, but they really have so many other vulnerabilities and challenges in these households. So I'm very privileged by the fact that households and communities were willing to work with us to do this research with them, to look at better ways to prevent, because you need to treat a large number of people to prevent one case, and this child is not sick sitting in front of you there. And I think it's very humbling, and it's really encouraging that communities we work with realize that TB is important. MDR TB is important, other prevention is important. They've often been very traumatized by having TB and MDR TB in the family. And it is really a privilege to be able to work with them. This trial was implemented at the community level in Cape Town where I work, and in communities where before COVID they were vulnerable and marginalized, during COVID.
All right. Unfortunately, it looks like we've lost that connection to Professor Annika Hesseling. She's the director of the Desmond Tutu TB Centre. I do apologize for that. I wasn't paying close attention to the time that we had allocated for our meeting. So this is then where we're going to end off that particular conversation. Just a quick reminder about the fact that today we've got the annual lecture, the inaugural lecture, the SAFM lecture that will be taking place. You can tune in to SAFM to hear the thoughts and insights of the former Chief Justice Mogoeng. We, of course, will also be streaming that lecture across multiple platforms on social media. Just before I go, another announcement is that the Portfolio Committee on Communications and Digital Technologies is inviting interested individuals and stakeholders to submit written comments on the SABC bill. The bill seeks to repeal the Broadcasting Act of 1999, to regulate the continued existence of the SABC, to provide for its governance, to amend the ICASA Act of 2000 and the Electronic Communications Act of 2005. For more information, you can contact the Portfolio Committee on Communications and Digital Technologies by emailing sabcbill@parliament.gov.za. You can direct that email to Hajira Sali. So the email address again, sabcbill@parliament.gov.za. That's where we leave it for today on The Talking Point. We're back with you again tomorrow morning. I leave you, as always, with a book reading.
Arsenal FC is only interested in rising to the summit.
Oh, what a finish by Zinchenko! Tremendously taken!
Meanwhile, Wolverhampton Wanderers also want a decent position in the top half.
Sasha collided into the bottom corner, and Wolves finally lead in the...
Will the Gunners of London keep their fans delighted, or will the Wolves have the final say? This is the Premier League. Catch the spectacular clash between Arsenal AFC and Wolverhampton Wanderers on Saturday, 2 December at 4 p.m. live on S3. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
The book reading. Please note the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SFM presents another episode of Simply Larry, read by Simpiwe Nkosi, written by Elias Masilela.
Chapter 12. Mission Swaziland. Mission Impossible. I have been happily here since 1970. I came here as headmaster. This is an apt summary of Larry's life and mission in Swaziland. He came to replace Father James O'Halloran, who was moving to South America after a 2-year stint as headmaster. Without his knowing it, this was going to last a lifetime. Father O'Halloran is well published and cited. He is entered in a number of biographical volumes, notably in the dedication section of the American Biographical Institute's Great Minds of the 21st Century, a publication limited to 1,000 biographies. These were big shoes to fill. I was very fortunate and felt honored to have been introduced to him during the development of the manuscript. At that point, he had just published a book about his travels and work. Father O'Halloran
came to Salesian in August of 1967 to take over as headmaster from Father Flynn. His first challenge in the school, he reveals in his book, was dealing with enrollment into Form 1 in the beginning of 1968, where the demand for space was 10 times the availability, 1,000 applications for 100 places. This was a huge administrative and emotional challenge for the school and for him personally. The school was forced to gradually transform into 4 streams to part accommodate this demand. The second challenge was having to deal with grown-up boys who saw teachers as their equals and refused to cooperate in class. He recalls that at some point, when the boys were asked questions, they would refuse to provide an answer and would instead respond in an arrogant tone. "You are the teacher. You should know the answer. Why are you asking us?" This resulted in a dismal academic performance for the school. Father O'Halloran related this to an absence of a culture of learning. He had to invest in changing this attitude and behavior. This was going to prove the toughest of his tasks. The third challenge was the psyche of Swazis, who did not understand the value of handicrafts or vocational training such as metalwork and woodwork. He was once confronted by a parent who demanded to know why his son was doing these subjects. "My son wants to be a doctor." Father O'Halloran's response was, "Will he never have the need to use his hands?" Silence followed. He ascribes this to a typical white-collar syndrome of many African countries. The fourth challenge was dealing with drinking at school. The boys would commonly consume a Swazi traditional brew popularly known as Shake Shake. There were 2 popular joints in the city centre at the time that supplied this brew, Good Hope and Gamasugu. Father O'Halloran taught English language, English literature, Latin, and Bible. He was also his own school secretary. He was part of the school management that witnessed firsthand the ushering in of independence for the Kingdom of Swaziland on 6 September 1968. He boasts of having enjoyed the same status when he served in Malta in 1964. He wrote the only personal experience of independence I have come across. When Larry first received the announcement of his posting, he was not sure about how he felt. But with hindsight, he thought it was the satisfying of a life's ambition. An ambition to be a missionary. I looked forward to coming to Swaziland than any other place I could have landed. My biggest disappointment in life is I should have learned Swazi culture and the language when I first came here. As a sign of being haunted, he repeats this statement several times